evening, I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Bill Bellows and Dr. Kevan Leach, along with an amazing leader, Mr. Christopher Chinapoo, with more than 30 years experience. I'm going to let them tell you, because we're coming back to our second segment now. We're going to be looking at leadership. I want to start this conversation with Mr. Christopher Chinapoo. Christopher, how are you doing this evening?
Well, I'm great.
My first question, which was posed for us to have today, is how do you define leadership? How do you define leadership, Mr. Chinapoo?
Well, leadership is our ability to actually set out a vision, set out a plan, and also, have persons sharing that vision and work with you towards that sort of common purpose. In like the most basic way, and in a nutshell, that's how I define leadership. Again, why I define it in that way, because I want to actually move away from the concept that leadership is about titles or fits within a hierarchical sort of a structure and so on. We want to actually put that leadership in a context that anyone within the organization who has an idea, who has a plan to actually accomplish that idea, and who can share and explain that idea and bring others together around that idea, becomes therefore a leader. So, essentially that leadership really is about that vision or purpose, and that ability then to bring people together, to work towards that sort of common purpose, in a nutshell.
Okay, so guys, let's hear from Dr. Kevan.
I think that I would add some bits on that.
Of course.
Leaders do need to set a vision, but I think they also need to understand that a few things here. Bill was alluding to it about people fixing their cars on a Sunday night and having a great deal of fun. I think under the traditional sort of Taylorist structures you have in many organisations, it's not uncommon to find that people who are, let's say, at a different level from somebody senior in the business, are actually in a volunteering role, holding down a much bigger job. They may be running the amateur football clubs for the entire state or something like that. And so there's an awful lot of talent being delivered, to great benefit to society. And the question as leader is, how do you engage and tap into that within an organisation so that they can deliver it within the organisation? I look at a couple of things that's really what drives and motivates people. And people really are intrinsically motivated. They're not basically extrinsically motivated. Oh, sure, there are some people who just want money, and that's the end of it. I think you need to ask yourself, how many of those people do you want in your organisation? It's going to be pretty customer-centric. And the things that really drive people are, they do need, first of all, autonomy. So the great leader is going to actually give those people some autonomy. And this is a pretty scary thing for a lot of traditional managers to do. Management traditionally is about control. And here you are, square one, giving away control. But you're not really. You're just actually developing people's autonomy. The second thing that people need is purpose.
But Doctor, before you go on to purpose, why do leaders need to develop? Why is that important?
if your focus is on dictating how the business will run, then what's it going to matter? But really, in a modern, right, let's go back to a bit of Taylorism for a minute. Years and years ago, right, a person would have skills and they would develop those skills. Then they may become a foreman somewhere. Then they would actually teach other people those skills and pass them on. And they'd eventually rise up through the organisation until they were in a more senior level. And even when they've risen to a more senior level, it would be very feasible for those people to still understand what went on at the lower levels in the business.
Right.
Since then, we have a much more educated workforce, a workforce with more leisure time and more disposable income. So they want other things. But also in there is that when people look for other things, they develop skills, they develop other mindsets, they develop ways of doing things. And today in a business, it would not be uncommon to find that the people at, shall we say, the customer interface know a heck of a lot more about what's going on in the business than the so-called managers do. So you now have a divide in the business. You have the ones who are actually expressing how the business should run, but they have lesser knowledge than the people who are being told how to run the business. You need to encourage the people who are in your business, your organisations, so that they feel they've some autonomy. They can report at different levels. The bit about, those decisions are above your pay grade are really not helpful. You need people to be able to develop their character and their understanding. And it goes back to what we talked about before. Why would you run the same course twice? These people are doing the same job every day. They're learning different skills, they're learning different nuances, subtle differences about the way things are evolving. You want all that, you need to understand that, because that's the goal in your business. I think as, what was it, 1941, I think it was the Vice President of Sales for Studebaker who put it. Right, the customer doesn't need us, but by heck, we need the customer. And it's all about that interface of understanding the customer and ensuring that that gets translated back through the business. And for that, if people don't have any autonomy, they don't feel as though they're valued, then you're going to lose all of that within your business.
I love that. I love that explanation. Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Anyone else kind of would like to weigh in?
Well, let me say is, not only do the employees need to understand the customer, but the designer needs to understand the manufacturing person's role. The manufacturing person needs to understand, procurement's role. So then you get into internal customers and external customers. The big thing is we need to stop thinking that when I pass my work on to the next person that has met requirements, that my job is done. So I need to downstream and then again downstream and then again downstream, however far it makes sense. Deming would say, he always asks, does your system include the future? So looking downstream, maybe downstream at the other people in the organization, including the customer, but it may also be looking downstream in time, asking, what business are we in? Will this business be sustainable? So it's understanding how I fit into a given system, period. So it's not just the external customer is in there. I've realization we've got internal people too. But the other thing I would say is, when I came out of grad school and went to work in Connecticut for this jet engine company, and once upon a time, I remember they were looking, people in senior management were using the word champions. We're looking for someone to champion this. This goes back to the mid-'80s. We're looking for a champion for this, and And I remember volunteering to champion something. I don't know what it was, but what I quickly realized was that as excited as the person was that I would champion something, what I quickly realized was not to be more excited about it than they were. So what they wanted was someone who was excited, but if you became too excited, then you would scare them. And so you really had to subvert your enthusiasm. So even, what people call champions, in a non-Deming environment, a champion is, of all those people who are not motivated, we're looking for someone who's motivated, but by all means, don't be more motivated than your boss, than your boss. You'll go in there and you'll say, "Boy, I got this great idea, Adrian, and I can see how we can use it in all our products," and your boss will be petrified. So what I wanted to bring that. Another thing is,
But before you go on, I want to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you think we as leaders need to adjust to create a generational impact that is lasting?
Well, first you have to define what do you mean by a leader, and I go back to what Christopher said is, if I would define leadership as the ability to bring forth a new order of things, to create a path for others to follow, whether it's a new path for the organization, a new path for how to develop software, a new path for how to work with suppliers. So I think when Rocketdyne was owned by Boeing started a leadership center in St. Louis, and in a given week there'd be a couple hundred people there. If you were a first level manager, you were there for a week taking a course called Frontline Leadership. If you were a middle level manager, it was leading from the middle. If you were an executive, it was a 2-week program, I don't know what it was called. But significantly, 99.99% of the people that went to the Boeing Leadership Center had to be managers. So if you were not a manager, you were not considered a leader. And I think if you want to calcify an organization, then adopt a style of management that says, if you're introducing a style of management which says very implicitly, if not explicitly, if you don't have direct reports, you're not a leader, because that gives everyone in the organization permission to just sit there and ask for direction. Now,
Right.
what you don't want is everyone running off doing whatever they want. What we need is an environment where people have ideas about how to develop new software, whatever they're doing. Now, those have to be vested, explored to see.
Yeah.
So I'm not proposing everybody does whatever they want. It has to fit the system. So what we're looking for is an environment where people come forward with ideas, but maybe the ship has sailed on that product, and maybe we tell, Kevan, great idea, I'm not so sure we can use it now. But what we need is a way of saying that in a way that Kevan doesn't get frustrated. But I look at it as every weekend, each of us every weekend go into the weekend with a list of things we want to do, most of which don't get done, and they get moved to the future, some of which get canceled. So it's not that we don't have the capacity to drop things, and we need that type of commitment. So I'm talking about a work environment where anyone could be a leader with a new order of things, but you need permission to make sure that fits into a greater system. In other words, you may come up with the idea of, we want to produce a 100% snap fit main combustion chamber for a rocket engine. Maybe we're only building one. Maybe it's not worth the effort. So I would say that. And the other thing it comes to mind is, years ago I did an after school program for elementary school students. So they were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and one week the mother, there are about 20 students in a given class, and I was talking to one of the mothers one week, and it turns out her husband showed up the next week, and he came in knowing I spoke with his wife about Deming's work, and he says, I was in the Air Force, and we studied Deming. What is it Deming said? You need to motivate your people. And I said, well, I think what Deming was saying is don't demotivate our people. They come to work motivated. How do we not demotivate them? It's not about empowering people. It's about what do we do not to disempower people. And again, the idea is that if everyone has ideas about what to do, how do you politely, say yes to some and no to others in a way that allows people to continue to be really engaged?
All right. I also want to probably chime in there too, because again, I want to go back to this whole question as to a contrast in the Tayloristic organization and a contrast in a Deming-based organization. Who is the leader? All right, and what you recognize in a Deming organization is basically leadership can exist everywhere and anywhere within the organization, and it's very important to actually have that. And what is this leadership all about? Leadership is also about helping people and helping others to do a better job, helping others to learn, and helping others to bring out their own intrinsic motivation. Recognizing that everyone has their own abilities, and how do we bring to bear this capacity? Because we can recognize that the greatest loss that we could actually suffer within the organization is actually the capacity of the employees and their motivation. It is actually the simplest thing to use, as we just commonly say too, that these forces of disruption has actually robbed people of their intrinsic motivation and stuff like that. So I really believe too that it's important too that we always contextualize that leadership too within the system that it operates. So the leadership also can't be divorced from the system to which the leadership is actually operating, as Bill was saying just now. Because if we have everyone coming up with great ideas, we have to know how do we come to the point where we can actually sift through the ideas and not make anyone feel like, oh, it is Chris' idea or Kevin's idea or Bill's idea that is being implemented. At the end of the day, it should become our idea. And there's something Bill always talks about too, Kevan always talks about too, that kind of shift from the I thinking to the we thinking. So basically, the leader basically has a task to help to transform the environment, to build an environment that allows for a move and a shift from I thinking and it's my resources and my my people and my process that is important, to the thinking now that it is all of us that are important. And if I need to make a sacrifice in my own process in order for all of us to do better, let's take a basketball game for instance, because right now the playoffs going on, right? So if Chris Paul says that I'm going to make the sacrifice and assist more, to create greater assists and have less turnovers so that all of us get better, so that I sacrifice my scoring, or another player decides that I sacrifice my my scoring to actually take more rebounds and to defend someone out, so that the entire system does better and that we all win. So at the end of the day, we also need to also recognize leadership in that ability too. And also another aspect of the leadership, sometimes the ability to express your own knowledge or the intuition to always prevent mistakes, or to get engaged in firefighting, or get engaged in just trying to solve all of the problems and getting enshrined into what people are doing. That ability to sometimes allow persons to just flourish and grow based on their intrinsic motivation is something that is an innate skill that leaders actually have to develop It's not something that we could actually tell you that, hey, there's something that you can actually do to develop it, but it is to become more aware of your thinking and how you think, so that you don't really get engaged in the control freak and anxiety over trying to control others or operate within a command and control paradigm. I think that from a leadership perspective, I think that is very important in terms of drawing a Deming contrast and also, putting, that out there in terms of thinking. Because there's also another thing too that we a common mistake, a common kind of thought that we believe too that if everybody does a good job, basically they do a good job, they make no mistakes, you're going to get quality. And that's a common thing. If you go back and talk about this, in the Deming Institute, this is something that is also talked about. But if you have the wrong process, or you have the wrong thinking, the wrong mindset, all the hard work in the world will not produce equality. And then there's another thing that, if all the people pay attention and don't make any mistake and we solve all our problems, that, by magic, you'll get quality, your system will actually work. And we have actually found too that we have actually improved our processes all the processes, but then they still don't work together. They still don't fit with each other. We don't manage the gaps or the interactions between the process, and then we still suboptimize our system. So leadership too actually has to think not within our own process, but within the entire system, and the implications of my actions on the whole, and not merely my actions on my community and on my own process also.
I want to ask a question. Are there entrenched silos within organizations that mean that leaders simply do not know what their peers are doing in other areas in the same company? And if so, how can we minimize these silos?
Right. I do that. I think, first of all, Adrian, there are some organisations that do have silos, and some companies deliberately make sure the silos are in. We don't want Department A talking to Department B under any circumstances, and that's very much to the detriment of those organisations. Yeah. And yes, you need to break them down. But just an interesting one for Bill and for Chris as well. I was looking at a company very recently over here in the UK, and they will know the traditional sort of hierarchical structure of the CEO down through the board, down through divisionals, right the way down to employees at the interface, put it that way. So there could be several layers, and it's all about command and control. This company, it's in specialist software, only has 2 layers. It has the functional layer, so you will have people who are specialists at certain types of programming. It will have the directors in there because legally you need them. It'll have somebody who specialises in accounts and a few others, so they're all in there, all at one layer. There is then a second layer, which is the customer interface layer, and you pick different people from different specialist disciplines to form a customer group, and that group is responsible to that customer for what that customer wants and is responsible for delivering it. They set their deadlines and time frames with the customer. They set the pricing structures with the customer, and they're responsible for making sure that that gets delivered. And the point about what happens if somebody has an idea, then that idea needs to be presented not only to that group first of all, but then is presented to the wider organisation. And they vote on that not by putting the hand up, but they vote on it by humming. And they do it in a way that, okay, the ones should be working on, we've only got a limited amount of resource, so where should we be putting that? So they will hum, and the loudest hums, the project with the loudest hums, that's what the group work on. So it then becomes a collective responsibility, because that's what we agreed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that integrates it into the business.
Yeah, I mean, to what you're saying, Kevin, is, and I can agree with that approach. I mean, that's a great approach. The risk you always run is the great idea walks out the door.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've got to have somebody overseeing that, Bill, to make sure that we just haven't actually let the great idea go. I agree.
But it could be. But there is. You may have an idea which appears wild to everyone, and the timing is just not right. And so the idea is that saying no to an idea, you might regret. But I mean, I'd like to think most of the time the organization will be fine. But somebody's going to write a book about the ideas that escaped, and I say there will always be ideas that escape because we can't be smart enough to bank every single one of them.
We don't have enough time or resources, whether that finds whatever. But you can allow the person with that idea to work it up. You can allow them some free time to work it up to see if it's more viable.
I mean, everyone who submits an idea wants to feel, one, listened to, also has to appreciate that the idea I submitted has contributions from each of you. So then it's really not my idea, it's corporation idea 502, which is Adrian's idea, went to Kevan, went to Chris, came to me. So if you have an environment where that is understood, then it's not Bill's idea which is being jettisoned. Not that could be a possibility. The other thing that comes to mind is I was working with a senior group in the UK back in the mid 2000s, and in the room were the three top people. I know one of them was the CEO. I think the others were there was a chief executive officer. I think another one was chief operations, and the other one chief financial. The significant thing was having three in the room was really cool for one-day program, and each of them asked the same question a little bit different way. And your answer, a comment you made, Kevin, remind me of this. They each wanted to know how to structure the organization. What would be the ideal design of the organization? And after the third guy asked the question, I had to be the CEO, I said, imagine this. I said, imagine a player, Adrian, who's been playing the entire football match, and we're tied, but Adrian is slowing down and he is exhausted. So I asked the coach, I'm going to pull Adrian and replace him with Chris, who's got fresh legs. And so I'm the coach, Adrian's down the sideline. Imagine his ability to be frustrated yet realize, I am tired. And shortly after Chris goes into the game, Chris scores a goal. And my comment to the executive was, does Adrian feel like he contributed to the goal that was just scored? And if so, well, my point I was trying to make to them is that I wanted to share is that I think if you have a thought process where you could see a contribution, well, I can see my contribution to you, Kevin, you can likewise say it to me. If we can see our contributions, then the physical layout of the organization is less important. And what I say is organizations go to the trouble of trying to physically compensate for a lack of that, and then we get four people in the same room but it's still engineering throwing it over the wall to manufacturing. You can still hear
That brings me to my next question. Do leaders find it difficult to collaborate with each other to the point that they actively avoid all efforts to consult and to learn from each other? I have found this to be true.
I'd say in a non-Deming organization, the leaders are the ones we call managers. And what you said is exactly the case. They are in competition with each other, will not share anything with one another, move ahead by watching their peers fail, and are discreetly rooting against them, and hold grudges.
Yes, but I want to also ask: Does this go across the board to the academic world? Simply because when I put that we were going to have this conversation today, someone asked me, an academic. He said, "How do you think that conversation is going to go? You're going to put academics in the same room?" And I said, I think it's going to go very well, because disagreement isn't necessarily an indication that I don't like what you are saying. It just means that I have a different perspective. And we would like to bring information to the public and show them that we can collaborate as well. As a matter of fact, having been involved in some opportunities with Christopher, his leadership style has been running off on me and showing me that a leader doesn't necessarily have to have a title. And it isn't even the person who is speaking the most. Even preparing for this program, what I, as a leader, was doing was making sure that I spoke less, asked a question, and just leave you guys to hash it out. Also, because I believe that we need to come to that place where it isn't a competition of knowledge or competition of information, but a collaboration. So that's why I love this conversation.
Can I sum that up in some ways for you, Adrian?
Sure.
You get the output behaviours in the staff that the management culture drives in.
Yes, it's all rational.
Yes. So if your management culture, and I'm using that in a sort of very loose term and non-Deming term at the moment, if that culture is one of openness and contribution and one of allowing autonomy, then many of those problems you've talked about don't arise. You get a whole different set, by the way, but you don't get those ones arising.
For the general public who's watching us, that Basis Speaks, the management culture, the organizational culture is those unwritten rules that everybody follows without even realizing that they're following. That's what the actual culture of the organization is. You can walk into a place, it takes you at least 6 months to really learn what that culture is. And that is actually what Kevan is referring to. Just for the purpose of persons watching who don't know what we're talking about, I'm trying to make this as across the board as possible. Christopher, do you have any comments?
Yeah, well, I actually just got bumped off a while ago, but in relation to that, yes, definitely. When we talk about this whole question of our culture, I like to think about our culture context in relation to the differences and the contrast again, the contrast between Tayloristic and a Deming organization, because again, that culture could span from anything from what you see physically to what you actually hear in the corridors to what how leadership actually engages with everyone, and I should say management there, how management engages, and then how leaders within the organization engage, because again, the leaders can exist everywhere. So again, this culture of cooperation rather than a culture of competition is definitely, these are actually something you actually have to do by design. You have to actually be intentional and deliberate about it. You know, you have to actually set it out as a purpose. Because what you'll find is that a lot of organizations by purpose and design set out with counterproductive management practices, sometimes built into the system, you know, and those actually influence the culture that comes out and the culture that evolves. You know, there are a lot of practices that are commonly considered to be good practices that should not be a part of any culture whatsoever, because they actually lead to more harm than good. They foster competition, they foster the lack of cooperation, they foster persons looking at their own processes, and sometimes it's as simple as the budget, how the budget is designed and who is favored within the budget and all of those sorts of things, you know. So that's just my input there.
And even if you go to Christopher, Bill, and Kevin, when you go to board meetings, for example, you know, I've seen this many times. Why did you not speak up? And you know, you come away from meetings sometimes feeling as though you were supposed to go in like a bulldog. You were supposed to go into the meeting and spew information. So my next question is, you know, how does leadership differ from management? We're in the 15-minute mark now, guys.
While pondering that, I think I would just add something about what you've said there, Adrian, is that the fact that we live in a probabilistic world and not a fully deterministic one is a bit of a culture shock to a lot of people in management, and it is a concept that is pretty difficult for them to understand, and we shouldn't be surprised because it starts quite early. So we do not teach in junior schools or secondary schools variation. We do not teach it at university. We sure as heck do not teach it on MBA courses. And so it's not surprising that you have a strata of management in businesses that feel that everything is pretty deterministic. We also have very much in the Western world businesses which are driven by a culture, certainly I would think in America, a 3-month cycle, accounting cycle. And in Europe it tends to be, you know, about a 12-month accounting cycle, but we're still driven by those cycles. In many ways, to me, they are false impositions. Very many of the KPIs in businesses are lagging indicators. They do not tell you what's truly going on in the business, the result of some other action in a business. So to build a business on them and use them as the primary drivers of management action is not really as useful as some of the other indicators that are around. And in order to get to that, we have to start looking at things in a different way. And that's very strange for a lot of managers. So you have to be very careful, because if you go in a bit gung-ho, it can be pretty career limiting. So you do have to be very careful. But I have been with a number of companies, and there's inertia in there as well. I've been with a number of companies where we've been doing work, and slowly but surely over a number of years, they've completely changed the culture of the business. And as an example, in one business, it became quite obvious that if we reversed a small part of the process, then we would chop the waste in half by about 50%. It happened to be a farm-related process. It took 5 years to convince the farmers to do that. But once they'd done it, the amount of waste just fell through the floor, and the profitability of the company quite rocketed. So you have inertia built in at all different places. You have it built in because of education. You have it built in because that's the way we've always done it, and that's the way we're going to carry on doing it. So the skill in your position is helping people to understand that and easing them through it.
Yeah, what? Back to the difference between management and leadership. I'd say in non-Deming organizations, you'll see things like you manage things, you lead people. We want our managers to be leaders. You go to the Boeing Leadership Center to learn as a manager how to be a better leader. So, and another thing I find in many organizations is they'll use expressions like senior management team, senior leadership team, executive leadership team, executive management team, and you could easily imply by these, looking at the same group of people being the senior executives, the senior leaders, the senior managers, you could easily infer from that implicitly leadership and management are one and the same. But then we say we want our managers to be leaders. So there's this, what I think is, on the one hand, we're saying they are all the same. And on the other hand, we're saying we want our managers to be leaders, which sends the message to all the non-managers that you're not a leader. I prefer that we look at the activities of everyone in the organization that's involved in managing resources. So we're each given a bunch of resources, time, equipment. We ask for these things as subject matter experts. And imagine an environment where we are managing resources with a mindset of act locally, think globally, whatever global means. So then in that mindset, Adrian, you ask for the resources you need. You don't ask for triple the resources, quadruple. You ask for what you think you need, right, to pursue an idea. And so as a leader, you have an idea, path to go follow. Now, you may have the idea for 100% snap fit design. The subject matter expert is in your head, but you don't know how to implement that. So you need someone like Kevan who's good at working with people. I look at leadership ideas, leadership with people. But the other thing I want to say is, I imagine an organization where everyone is managing resources, our time, our money, the computing time we need, and we're doing that in the sense what works for this, not me. And then relative to resource lead, so that's resource management to me. Resource leadership is coming up with new ways to manage resources. So going back to what Chris is saying is, I look at management and leadership as activities, not assigned to people. And the other thing I want to say is that there's a Time magazine 10 so years ago had a cover story, The End of Cancer in Our Time. And I read it cover to cover, and what came out in that article is germane to what we're talking about. What came out of the article was the leading cancer researchers around the world said, cancer will not be solved by one person. We have to stop thinking of the hero. And the message, what I got out of it was, stop, because the message was to those who spend money and donate to these causes, and the strategy was, if you're an investor, a donor, and you're about curing cancer, stop funding people who think they could solve it by themselves, and start funding people who are about collaborating with other universities around the world, because that's what it's going to take. And I thought, that's a brilliant model, because now what we're saying is, that goes back to your academic question, is it's then squashing, well, we at George University can do everything. You know what? You don't get funded. We want to see you working with, right, University of Manchester. We want to see you working with Texas A&M. Now we'll listen to you. So that's what.
That's a great contribution. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, so I would actually like to chime in also, just quickly. But
Sure.
I do believe that a lot of organizations are really tampering with their processes and tampering with their people by really mismanaging their people. And when I say mismanaging, I really mean to having people work in an environment where it is all about individualistic performance. And we typically come and we bring in things like KPIs and all these type of things that is just really, is a whole lot of command and control, right? And how I think I want to take this term that I actually borrow from Alan Bill. It is this whole thing about a theater of managing. So it's like we want to say that we're doing this for X to happen, or we're doing that. We rewarding our rewarding our best employees. We really just trying to manipulate and exercise authority, and it's all about where these sources of power come from. So when we talk about, to me, leadership really comes back to also where the sources of power comes from. Good managers actually necessarily practice good leadership, and but a leader may not necessarily be a manager, right? So sometimes they have that source of power in terms of authority, they have the knowledge, they have personality, and good ones, Deming would say, good ones, develop their abilities based on knowledge and personality to influence. And I want to take something that Bill, in our conversation, Bill and I pretty much have some talks, and Kevan, we have one actually programmed in this whole question of an end of perfection. A lot of organizations run around trying to perfect everything, firefighting all the time, and not recognizing the difference between firefighting and improving the systems. So that difference between management and leadership also comes down to where management thinks that their job is actually to firefight and not really help people to do their jobs, not help people or explain to them why it is they're doing what they're doing, and because the difference is that the purpose for doing X or Y may differ based on the context of the organization. All right. And the last thing that I want to say too is that whole question of managing individuals versus managing interaction is a question of leadership. All right. So understanding to the boundaries of your system and working on these interactions is actually the difference between persons who transcend between managing and actually leading. And leading within this whole framework of recognizing to the learning. And in the Deming mindset, you will think about that learning too in the concept of the experimentation of the plan, do, check, plan, do, study, act cycle. Helping people to understand their why and helping persons to learn as a reference a theory or an experiment. But I know we won't have much time to really go through that, understanding, but I just wanted to put that out there too as a lens from which the Deming lens will actually look at this whole question of managing and leading.
We would have started talking about and having you guys describe what the Deming method and philosophy is. Our conversation segued into leadership simply because I believe that we live in a time where people don't connect with the difference between management and leadership. Leaders. I used to think that leaders are born. I used to think that leaders, once you are born a leader, you are a leader, and people don't become leaders. People become managers. But through the process of time, I have come to understand that a leader is a person who looks for a way to make things better. A leader is a person who lifts other people in whatever circumstances they are in. A leader is not a person who manages systems, but at the same time, understanding that the organization itself is a living, it is actually a living organism, functions like a breathing organism. And that's one of the reasons why I asked about the organizational culture. But we've had an interesting conversation with some great minds. I'm so, I feel privileged to have these great guys here on with us as we wrap up our conversation today, navigating the terrain of leadership in the 21st century. We heard from Mr. Christopher Chinapoo. We also heard from Bill Bellows and Dr. Kevan Leach. Guys, I'm going to give you each 1 minute to give recommendations, if you can, in 1 minute.
Oh boy.
One of the things, Adrian, is the subject really surrounding Dr. W. Edwards Deming's work is very big, and you need to go over it several times to get into it and even try to understand it. As Bill was saying, it's a philosophy that encompasses many things that a lot of the methodologies out there do not encompass. And it's teaching that you have to look at your product all the way through to how it's used by your customer, and you have to feed that all the way back all the time. And I would say again to people, don't lose your thirst for knowledge. Don't lose the excitement of wanting to go over and read lots and lots of books again and again. And out of that, you'll refine and hone your understanding, and you'll be able to see where other philosophies fall short and where they augment, and be able then to apply it to better affect yourself.
Let me add. I think I look at them as providing a foundation. If you're building a house, the foundation is the cellar, the concrete. And you want a very strong foundation, deep enough for your organization, broad enough for the organization. But the second philosophy, if you look at it in that metaphor of a foundation and pouring the concrete, in order to have a home or a business, you still need someone to do the framing, someone to do the plumbing, someone to do the electrical work, the sheetrock work, put the roof on. So I wouldn't suppose that Deming has everything. It has a fascinating, comprehensive foundation, and the foundation is about effectiveness. That we do things, as Chris was referring, understanding how things interact, piece together.
You only have 5 more seconds, Doctor.
But you need, and not to confuse effectiveness with tools and techniques, which are necessary. Tools and techniques are great, but they're not about it.
I love when we get academics together. Thank you so very much. Chris, do you have any final words?
All right, so my final word will be simply to look at it that one, the Deming actually helps you, is a map of theory that helps you to look at your organization from an outside view. It does not actually prescribe what you must do, but help you to ask some questions. And when you actually map through these 4, elements that cannot be separated, in terms of appreciation for the system, knowledge of variation, knowledge of theory of learning, and knowledge of psychology, is actually not only just a map of theory, but it is just, you have to look at it too within the interactions within the 4 elements, and it helps you to look at almost everything that you do in and across the organization, your community, and everywhere, to really act more sustainably, to think differently, and to really not recognize that it goes beyond techniques and things and manipulation of your systems. So I would advise persons to probably go out and probably read more. You could follow the Deming Institute, look at the Deming Special Interest Group in the CQI as sources and references. I think that Bill, Kevan, and even myself is available on Twitter and things like that, so you can actually follow us, and you can follow other members of the Deming Special Interest Group of the CQI. And I think that could get a greater appreciation for the thinking and what is this. The Deming Institute also provides videos and podcasts.
Yes.
And we'll also soon be providing a lot more podcasts in the particular area. So, a lot more insights will be out there.
Thank you so very much, Christopher Chinapoo. Guys, I'm Dr. Adrian Daisley, and you're on Dr. Daisley Speaks on 246vibesradio.com, as we are faced with intersecting issues and problems moving our world forward. We have been looking at involving big in education, business, technology, innovation, development, and sports. Dr. Bill Bellows. I want to thank Dr. Kevan Leach and Mr. Christopher Chinapoo for joining us this evening on Dr. Daisley Speaks. And I would like to say that this is not going to be the last time that you're going to hear these phenomenal leaders on with us. Thank you so very much.